Hello and welcome back to the Caring Conversation sponsored by Cornerstone Care Solutions. We have Hilary and Steve from Leonard Curtis. They're here to do a discussion on the administration process, how it works and the risks and things to be aware of when a care home or a care service might go into administration. So the first question I have for both of you is, what is the difference between administration and liquidation?
An administration is a funds a procedure that is more geared to breastfeed the business, whereas a liquidation generally is where the business is seeking to trade. There isn't the ability necessarily to sell the business, and you're probably just looking at a sale of assets.
If the process goes into administration, is there any time where that might end up changing into a liquidation? How does that work?
Yes, it would do. So a company may go into administration. The administrator looks to realise the assets of the company. If it's a care home, obviously a sale of business or a sale of certain assets. And the liquidation can be an exit route out of administration, and the requirement to exit through liquidation would be that you're going to pay a distribution to unsecured creditors.
So I've heard of moratoriums and CVAs. What are those and when would they come into play?
So a CVA is a company voluntary arrangement. That's whereby a company looks to put a proposal to its creditors to compromise the debts or to arrange for sort of almost like a time to pay arrangement, a payment plan, but in a more formal structure. So a company may look to pay a certain value of pence in the pound back to creditors. They may look to pay creditors back in full, and a CVA can last between 3 to 5 years typically, and therefore that allows the company to be able to make those payments back, generally either through payment through profits that have been generated in that period, or there may have been a sale. So then a chunk of cash comes into the CVA that then allows there to be a payment back to creditors.
And is there a process whereby a CVA can end up moving into another one of those as well, or what would normally happen?
I think there possibly is, because if a CVA fails, then there's the option to either, all the insolvency options are pretty much there on the table. Typically you may see an administration follow a CVA, or even a liquidation follow a CVA.
Okay, so when a lender is appointing somebody over a service in administration, what would trigger their choice between putting it in administration, arranging a CVA, or potentially closing the business with a liquidation? What would make them choose that?
A CVA is more driven by the directors of the company, and it's an agreement with the unsecured creditors, albeit you still need to have liaised with your main funders. They sit outside the arrangement, but obviously you still have to be able to service the debt during a CVA period. And sorry, I lost the question there.
So what would be the triggers for an appointment into administration as opposed to a closure?
Yeah, so sorry, I'll just go back. So the CVA, although it's the directors proposing the CVA, it's not necessarily the bank. There is a discussion with the funder there. So a funder wouldn't necessarily be able to force an appointment of a CVA. Whereas under the terms of security, where a funder has a fixed and floating charge, they'll have the ability to appoint an administrator in an insolvency scenario of a company.
What is a fixed and floating charge? Are you able to go into that in a bit more detail?
The fixed charge is generally covered over the property, the goodwill of a company, and the floating charge it covers the remainder of the assets. Sometimes you may have a funder in there that has security over the book debts because they provide an ID facility, factoring facility, that sort of thing, and that would be a fixed charge. But it's the floating charge element that gives a funder the ability to appoint an administrator.
And what if there was more than one charge against that property? How does that work, or the business? How does that work?
Where you see multiple lenders, so you can look at Companies House, you see a charges register, you'll see that if there's 2 or 3, generally when those security arrangements are being put in place, there may be some agreement between those lenders of who takes priority. If there isn't, then generally the first lender will be the main party that can proceed with the administration. Other than that, the other lenders would have to give notice to the other charge holders if they were looking to appoint.
And then do the other charge holders have any say in that process, or?
If they're the prior ranking charge holder, ultimately they're given notice and they could then appoint their own insolvency practitioner.
They could trump the original one and then appoint their own instead of...
It all goes on the order of priority, so it's either based on the age of those charges that are registered, or the deed of priority will set that out.
Okay. So when an appointment is planned and it's starting to happen, what happens on day one of appointment? What's the process?
So on day one, it's important to establish what the financial standing of the company is as soon as practically possible. So that might take the form of, depends on the quality of the company's financial records. Some have good purchase ledger, sales ledger records. Some have less so good records. So it's important to get a picture of what the historic trading pattern's been. So that might involve preparing a spreadsheet, reviewing historic bank statements effectively line by line over a period of time to determine what payments go out on what periods, what income you can expect to receive. And then once you've determined that historic trading pattern, you can analyse that and determine what of those payments that are being made are critical, what do we need to make recurring going forward, what can we potentially eliminate, what don't we need to make those payments, where can we make the savings.
And I think the care home that we've dealt with recently, we walked in day one and we had no financial information at all, and so we did have to use the bank statements, and you're starting from scratch. You're almost doing an investigation. Over time you find out that something may be on finance that you're not aware of, but day one we're looking for all these sorts of indicators, and that's why the bank statements are a good place to start.
And so in that process, what say that's what you do in the first few weeks of an appointment, how do things progress following that first few weeks? So once you've got an idea of what direct debits are going in and out, you've got your own management accounts maybe in the first month or so, what's the next step that you then would look at?
You build up the forecasting picture to see what your affordability is over the next number of months. So obviously a primary sort of concern is having enough money available for the payroll. In terms of fees that are being received, what's the payment profile look like on those? Are they payable in arrears, in advance? And even what day of the month do they come in? Because that will determine what you've got available cash flow wise at any given period of time. And overall, is that company viable? So you'll be able to see over a 2-3 month period, are you actually making money? Or do you need to revisit those costs? Obtain further, if you're using suppliers, do you look at alternative suppliers potentially who may offer a cheaper service, etc.?
So what are the risks of an appointment into administration? What sort of things do you need to think about during that?
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
The risks in administration. So what things do you think about during an appointment or
Firstly, obviously, it's the care of the residents, under no doubt about that. Secondly, as administrators, there is an element that we could be personally liable. We can fall foul of everything that a director can fall foul of. So we've got to be aware of the actions that we take and
how to run a care service.
It is. It's really important that we've got the experience. We've dealt with a large number of care homes and traded them for a long time. So well aware of the risk. But every home that you go in will be different. Every local authority you deal with, the payment terms are different. And they change over time as well. So I've worked with one care home a while back. In fact, Lucy, it was the first one we did, and I think we went into that care home. The payment terms with the local authority were 2 weeks in advance, 2 weeks in arrears, or the other way around, and then it moved to 6 weeks in arrears, and all of a sudden you've got a huge impact on your cash flow because you've got to bridge that 6 week period. So these are all things that we need to keep mindful of. We take insurance out. We have professional indemnity insurance as standard. We take open cover insurance when we're appointed. We instruct yourselves and other care providers to come in, deal with the operations, and look at the health and safety as well as care, look at the state of the building, what capital expenditures needed, what's critical and what's not critical, and that will take the priority, and all this takes form of the cash flow that we're building and the forecast to ascertain whether we can trade the home for a period of time to be able to get a sale across the line.
So I noticed you mentioned there about the cash flow and something someone that hasn't been involved in this process before might not realise, that the bank accounts get frozen in administration. So What happens if you're coming up to payroll or you have some expenditure? How does that get managed in the administration process?
You've got to find some money quick. Usually, in a lot of situations, you might have a bank that has appointed you, and they may give you an overdraft, because you start this with no money at all usually, unless the company has got cash at bank, which is unusual. The situation that we've dealt with recently, we haven't taken any institutional financing to fund the trading of the administration. But what we did do, there was wages that were outstanding on the date of appointment. We're not going to have the goodwill of the employees if we don't pay them. So the firm I work for, Leonard Curtis, we actually funded the payment of those wages on a temporary basis, and then that is repaid over time once you're in a state of generating profit, etc. So you can take an overdraft, you can go out and get financing. Obviously there's a cost to that as well, so that's going to impact on your cash flow. So we've been quite fortunate in this one situation that we're working with at the moment. We've not needed to do that as yet. So but there's various options out there. You might take invoice discount facility, fund some of the resident fees. So there's all sorts of options available, as it would be if you were a director of a company.
Okay, great. So in the administration process, is there a time limit or a time frame that an administration process would take over, or how does that work?
Generally, administration lasts for a period of up to 12 months, but you have got scope to then extend that further should you have not managed, for example, to sell the property or sell the care home as part of that. So you can then seek to extend it for a further 12 months with the consent of the secured creditors and decision of the creditors themselves.
And then beyond that, we can go to court, can't we, to extend the administration further. So in most cases with care homes, you are in office for, where you're trading, it can be a significant period of time, because more often than not there is an embargo there, and you may want to look at trying to turn around that position of the business to make it more saleable, to get the better return for the creditors.
And that leads me on to the next question. I was going to ask, at what point do you decide to market the home to then find a buyer for it?
It'll be totally different in every situation. So we had one home, didn't we, which it wasn't viable, and we started to market that fairly quickly within a couple of months, but we had wound down that home. And then there's other scenarios where, again, the first home that we worked on together, that had an embargo. There were serious issues with the care at the home. It had been in special measures for about 14 months at the point that we got appointed, and the occupancy had previously been very high, nearly 90%, and had dropped down to about 55% occupancy. by the time that we got appointed. And we, I think the advice that we took was, let's get it out of the embargo, get it back up and running. The CQC had lifted the embargo, and we traded for about 6 months post that, so that we could give purchasers good financial information, get the occupancy level up, get it performing well, and that was the optimum time to then sell that business. So there's all different strategies that we may take, and that will be determined on how we can fund the trading period, because as administrators we can't trade at a loss.
So then moving on to sourcing the buyer for the business, how do you approach that when you are ready to sell?
Well, we'll engage a marketing agent who will come and value the property, view the property, and then they'll go away, provide us with an indicative valuation, market it to the outside world, if you like. Run that for a period of time. There's no finite period for that. See what the best offers are, if any, that come to the table, and then we'll give those consideration. We'll engage lawyers to consider the value or the offer that's been received, with a view to then ultimately hoping to accept and progress that sale.
Yeah. How does it work then? If you have a number of buyers come to the table and you've got different offers with different backgrounds, who chooses, first of all, who the buyer should be, and what is the process for choosing the best buyer?
Well, we work alongside our advisors, so the agents that we've instructed to sell the home, they've got the wealth of experience of understanding what the position of that purchaser. So they'll look at, are they already a care provider? Have they got a good standing with the CQC? Because if they've got homes where the compliance is showing as bad, then in reality to try and get a registration through is going to be an uphill struggle. So you're looking for providers that have got a good standing with the CQC to make that process easier.
So it wouldn't necessarily be the person offering the most money that would be the buyer that you choose?
Not always. The highest offer isn't always the best offer. There may be some conditions attached to an offer, so you just work through those. So we would take some advice from yourselves in respect of the compliance of those purchasers, and we would take guidance from the agents that we've instructed, looking at how the purchase is going to be financed. Is it a cash offer? Is it subject to survey? Any other kind of conditions attached to it? So you work through that, and that will determine who the right buyer will be.
And then once a buyer is sourced, what's the process then for the sale? What happens next?
Once we've accepted an offer, we're going to instruct legal advisors to start working through a contract, issuing that contract. We will liaise with yourselves with regards to offering to the purchaser whether they need assistance with the CQC registration. That's good for us because we can then feed back to the stakeholders of the business so that they're aware of what at every stage of that registration process is going through, and it just keeps everybody kind of settled and on board with the process.
And then as administrators after that, is there anything else that you need to think about when the sale is completing? Is there anything else that you need to consider or deal with after the fact?
After a sale, then the administration of dealing with the creditors, that's when that begins. So you probably have a bank in there. They will need to be repaid from sale proceeds if you've got a fixed charge asset. So they're first in line to receive the funds in respect of that. And then it works down in a waterfall. So you've got preferential creditors that are usually employees with claims for redundancy, notice pay, all that. But where there's a survival of a business, that liability doesn't crystallise because the employees have transferred to the purchaser. Then you have HMRC as a secondary preferential creditor, If there's a liability HMRC, then they're next in line, and then your general unsecured creditors. So we work through that process. Realistically, when you know the value of the sale, you will already know the priority of who's getting paid and what the outcome is. And so we let creditors know that throughout the process of administration, our statutory duties, reporting. We report roughly on a 6-monthly basis to creditors, so they're fully aware of whether or not there is a possibility of them receiving a distribution.
Wow, that's really interesting. Thank you so much for coming and explaining the whole process of administration. It's really, really useful because there's not really anything out there on how insolvency works in the healthcare sector. So I think this is going to be really helpful to listeners to get an idea of what the process is, or somebody looking to buy a care home or a care service out of administration. They might be worried about it or not sure. So for them to understand that process, that would be really, really helpful.
Yeah.
And from our side of the fence as well, having people understand the difference between administration and liquidation so that our job's easier and people understand what our process is.
Yeah.
And that's really helpful too. But thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for listening. So this is Hilary and Steve from Leonard Curtis talking to us about administration.